Earlier this week, a senior American official, asked about the effectiveness of decades of sanctions policy, said the strategy was working exactly as intended. Hold on to that, because in the same news cycle, multiple outlets reported that Iran's economy, after enduring some of the most extensive sanctions regimes in modern history, had developed entirely new financial channels that appeared to be functioning with surprising resilience. Working as intended and adapting around the intention cannot both be fully true. Today I want to show you which one is the lie. CNN is asking whether sanctions need to be tougher. Fox is asking whether they're too soft. The BBC is asking about the humanitarian cost. All the wrong questions, because they assume sanctions are a one-directional tool. The right question is this: what happens when the target of economic warfare studies the warfare itself and turns the same techniques back on the side that invented them? In the next 20 minutes, I'll walk you through what I call the mirror strategy and why it might be the most underappreciated story in modern economic statecraft. I call this the mirror strategy. Here's the simple version. The United States built modern financial warfare, the use of the dollar system, correspondent banking relationships, and secondary sanctions to isolate adversaries into arguably its single most effective non-military tool of the last 30 years. It worked because, for a long time, almost nobody else had built comparable financial infrastructure outside the dollar system. But tools, once built and demonstrated, can be studied. And the country most extensively sanctioned for the longest continuous period has had more practice than almost anyone else at building workarounds. The historical anchor here is the story of Britain's Royal Navy blockade strategy in the Napoleonic Wars. Britain's blockade was devastatingly effective for years, until smugglers, neutral shipping routes, and continental workaround economies adapted around it well enough that by the time it ended, large parts of the continent had simply built parallel systems that no longer depended on British-controlled trade at all. A blockade that lasts long enough eventually teaches its target a new economy. There are 5 pieces of evidence for the mirror strategy. Number 1, the barter and swap economy. Reports over the past several years have documented increasingly sophisticated oil-for-goods barter arrangements between Iran and trading partners willing to bypass dollar-denominated transactions altogether. Each new swap arrangement is a small brick in an alternative financial wall. Number 2, the shadow fleet. A documented network of tankers operating with obscured ownership structures, frequent flag changes, and ship-to-ship transfers at sea has allowed continued oil exports despite sanctions designed specifically to prevent exactly that. It's the maritime equivalent of laundering money, not eliminating the activity, just making it harder to trace. Number 3, regional currency arrangements. Trade agreements increasingly denominated in currencies other than the dollar, particularly with major Asian trading partners, reduce Iran's exposure to the exact lever that gives American sanctions their global reach in the first place. If you don't touch the dollar system can't touch you. Number 4, the domestic substitution economy. Tushin. Decades of isolation forced investment into domestic production of goods previously imported, from pharmaceuticals to certain categories of industrial equipment. Sanctions intended to create scarcity instead, over a long enough timeline, created a forced domestic manufacturing base. Jiang Xueqin and counterintuitive side effect of economic pressure. Number 5, the knowledge export. Iran's experience evading sanctions has itself become a kind of consulting product, informally shared with other sanctioned or potentially sanctioned states, expanding the population of actors who understand how to build around dollar-based financial pressure. Every new student of the Playbook makes the original tool less universally effective. Now, the strongest case against everything I just laid out. A serious critic will argue that none of this changes the basic math. Iran's economy has still suffered enormously under sanctions, with currency depreciation, inflation, and capital flight all documented extensively, and that calling any of this winning radically understates the real human and economic cost inside the country. Survival is not the same as victory. That's a completely fair point, and I don't want to minimize the genuine hardship sanctions have caused. But here is what that argument cannot explain. If sanctions were simply working as designed, the policy goal, a fundamental change in Iranian state behavior, should have been achieved decades ago under far less developed countermeasures. Instead, The gap between sanctions, intensity, and behavioral change has only widened over time, even as the country's adaptive capacity has grown. So let's put it together. The mirror strategy isn't a claim that Iran is economically thriving. It's the more specific claim that the primary mechanism America built to enforce compliance, financial isolation, has steadily lost potency precisely because it has been used visibly and repeatedly against the same target for so long that the target has had the rare luxury of decades to engineer around it. And here's the twist: nobody in this conversation wants to say out loud. The country actually benefiting most from this slow erosion of dollar-based financial leverage isn't Iran. It's every state with an interest in a multipolar financial system. And China, again, sits at the center of that interest, given its own ambitions for its currency to play a larger global role. Every workaround Iran builds is a small real-world proof of concept that the dollar system's chokehold isn't as absolute as it once was. Tehran is, in effect, running the field tests for a financial architecture Beijing would like to scale. Watch these three things in the next 48 to 72 hours. 1. Any new bilateral trade announcement explicitly priced outside the dollar. 2. Any U.S. Treasury action specifically targeting shadow fleet operators. A sign regulators are still chasing a structure that keeps regenerating faster than it can be shut down. 3. Any commentary from oil markets about discounted Iranian crude finding new buyers. Discounts that persist despite sanctions tell you the workaround network, not the sanctions regime, is setting the real price. Your homework: look up the public treasury OFAC sanctions designations over the last 2 years and count how many target the same categories of evasion repeatedly. Repetition and enforcement targets as itself evidence that the underlying network keeps regenerating. If you think I'm overstating the resilience of this workaround economy, tell me in the comments with sources. I want to be challenged on this one specifically. Here's the question I'll leave you with. If the most powerful economic weapon in the world only works the first time you use it, because every subsequent use teaches the target how to survive it, what does that actually say about the long-term durability of economic warfare as a tool of statecraft at all? I'll see you in the next one.